Yeah, I just feel like when one is in spaces that are more progressive, right, and when you're in spaces that are much more liberal, and places that have a lot of pain and hurt, right, and have people who are marginalized, and you care for these people and you belong to these communities, I think it's really challenging to have complex conversations when we're seeing just such like a myopic view of how it is that we come together as a society.
Well, we
Right?
were talking earlier
Yeah.
how you said he was a metaphor, but what was he metaphor for? Like, what was he symbolic of? And we talked about the
Yeah.
underbelly.
Yeah. I think that he's a metaphor for people that exist in our society who are afraid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, he's American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
And that does not is like it's not based on like race, skin color. Cause my dad is a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't even know anything about Trump. The media the Vietnamese American media that feeds him is like Republican anti-communism, right? So like he'll come to like a family gathering with the Trump hat on, and he just have it on because he doesn't know anything better. He's just like he just puts it on, but then he not knowing that he is advertising his Trumpness, but has zero knowledge about Trump, other than he looks like a great man. He's gonna save this country, right? It's American exceptionalism.
Yeah. And so here you have this man that essentially represents the polar opposite of everything that I value and I believe in. And yet I can still look at him as a symbolism and a strong symbol of what is happening right now in terms of the polarization of our society, and how it's awakening all these feelings of belonging and representation and whiteness in our society, that we have not been able to talk about and articulate, but that has always been there. And so I think that
So now I have a question because the idea now of color has been brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about blackness. So now it seems like we need to start talking about whiteness. Is that what because I know there was that book that came out by Robin DiAngelo. What's the name of it? Where she's talking about, it's a whole...
Is it white guilt? Is it something about...
No, it's something close to that. But she came out with a book where it's specifically toward
White fragility.
White fragility. Thank you so much. And I wonder that now we're having this conversation now about that. Now we have to, now we're beyond blackness. Now we're going to whiteness.
It always go back to whiteness.
Yeah. I don't think that we're beyond like black and brownness at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that Ben is correct in saying that it will always revolve around.
And that's why,
whiteness.
when you're mentioning one of your classmates, so tired to be explaining herself all the time and talking about her identity, because the white people, they don't do the work. Even if they're liberal, they're not going to do the work. They always imagine that, the minority will come and explain and help them, hold their hand, explain things to them, make them feel comfortable.
And it's not a monolith.
And it's not our job.
Yeah. And not only is it not our job, but it's not a monolith, and it's so complicated, right? So you can't put us in category how we're constantly put into categories, and it's just.
So do you feel that being colorblind is a solution to this problem?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
One cannot be colorblind, but I think it's just so hard to gain perspective, and that's what I'm talking about. The polarizing of it is trying to understand us all just as people, and complex and nuanced, right? Is that we're not always going to be one thing, and I think that these categories that we're constantly put into. But that I also believe in equality, and part of that is bringing people who that have and that have nots, and looking at that and thinking about marginalization, right? And that's important because we see that the lack of agency and empowerment within marginalized communities is really important for me to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my agenda is an equity agenda, and so when I'm thinking about that in terms of any person in our society who is thought of or treated as a second-class citizen, then when I see Trump for myself, I just think that that is not the agenda that he's pursuing. The agenda that he pursues is capitalism, and that is America, right? That has been the tradition of America.
American empire and American imperialism.
And people and his followers like want that. And so when Ben talks even about his dad being a supporter, it's that they see that is the thing that one aspires to, right? Keeping up with the Joneses.
Like when you see these signs, right? Asian for Trumps, black for Trumps, you know.
Yeah, there's
Hispanic for
Candace
Trump.
Williams, who's very much.
Yeah, and you're like, what the fuck? Like, especially like, you know, like those Latinos for Trump, like, what the fuck?
And I don't understand that. And
Women for Trump too.
Yes.
Women for Trump.
That all, I don't understand that, because for me personally, but I also have to look at that, especially as an educator, is that just because for me personally, from my perspective and from every fiber of my being, do not support that, the complexity of thinking and having these conversations with people who do, I feel like I know people who are Trump supporters. They're kind, generous people, right? And it's the way to get around that is just not to talk politics. But I don't think that that's the answer either.
Right.
And one does that. They just sort of like brush it off, or they say, okay, we're going to get along, but we're just not going to talk politics. Well, we have to understand that as Americans and in any society really, politics are so embedded into policy, and they affect us every single day, right? And so I just think we have there's not a huge awareness in terms of what politics are and how they can affect change in policy.
So let me ask you a question, because I was born in 1964 when they enacted the Civil Rights Act. And remember when they had like, they were giving grants and money for people of color, so to speak. That's what it was called, you know. Do you not think we've made any progress whatsoever from that point to now, or in terms of politics? And if we did, what would it be? Like, what was it that we made progress in?
That's a really challenging question. That really is, because I get told this all the time.
I mean, because you guys come together, and you're Asian and she's Latina, Caucasian, should I say? So, I mean, I see two cultures that are getting along, and it seems like you guys understand one another. There's some progress. No, I mean, I'm just trying to make sense of this. But
I agree that that's the progress, is that with society you can openly potentially be in a relationship, whether that be a romantic relationship or a deep friendship, or even just acquaintances. You can come together socially, communally, and be openly supportive of people who have different beliefs, that belong to different, I guess, identify differently, or I wouldn't even say differently. How would you put it? Like, that come from different backgrounds, have different backgrounds, different beliefs, upbringings.
The shared experience is being marginalized.
Well, that's always the struggle, is the shared experience.
Even in you know, Bay Area, of course, very diverse and multicultural. But of course, compared to the whole United States, the Bay Area is a unicorn, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I live in
California's the unicorn.
For 6 years.
California and New York.
Yeah, are the unicorns, because we benefit from that.
And people need to go live in other states. You live in Kansas, right?
That's where my family lives now. My direct family.
Yeah. When I moved to Arizona, teaching at Arizona State University, the first time I really experienced like racism, like in my face. I was at a DMV, just getting my driver license, and this guy right behind me was already telling Asian jokes to everybody in line. I was like, what the fuck? Where am I coming to? You know?
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, like bluntly, just Asian jokes. And then of course, in the pandemic, it's not easy. Being the Asian person.
No, but when people say like this West Coast, East Coast thing, or how it is that these it's so polarizing, and we're forgetting about the middle. That's so much part of the base as well. And what appealed to people, I think, about Trump was that sort of this acknowledgement, I guess, finally, of Middle America, and I guess resources. right? And just a general overall acknowledgement that there is thinking outside of these two worlds, right? And you know, we're from California, and so we so benefit every single day from that, but it doesn't mean that racism still isn't alive and well in those areas. Sexism is definitely alive and well in those areas.
I'm wondering if maybe too, it's like, you know, because when I go back to Kansas, people, you know, do make jokes. My friends, you know, make jokes like, oh, how does it feel to go back to redneck country? And I'm like, ooh, I think there's a little bit of prejudice here, don't we? Mm-hmm. And I always think too, it's like probably a stereotype view of what people in those parts of the world or our country are. And when I go there, I don't see that at all. Especially in bigger cities. And when I go to the small towns, like I'm living in one right now, I see that people are really kind of like, are comfortable living the kind of life they want to live. And so for me, the word conservative means conserving your land, conserving your community. And there's a disconnect between two parts, and I'm wondering, and you know, during the pandemic, so many people from big cities were rushing over here to this small town to have the small town experience. And sometimes small town people go, look, these chilangos coming here, which is a slang for Mexican city, people coming here, and they come in here like really arrogant, and I'm wondering a little bit about that. Like, what is it about the big cities that they can't accept the reality of what it takes to live out in the country or in a small town? I'm saying it like that not to be judgmental or anything, but I do notice there's some prejudice going on, a difference between a lifestyle. And the conservatives, when I hear them complain, it says, well, we just want to preserve what we have. Everything's functioning the way it is. We're not causing any problems. We're living our life here. If they want to come, they can, but they have to adapt to what country living is, what small town living is. And then they have to adapt to living in a big city and getting used to diversity. Yeah. How do we deal with that?
It's implicit bias. We all have implicit bias.
Interesting.
Every single one of us, regardless of how well read we are, regardless of.
And how do you feel? Yeah. So then, Trump was really speaking to people who felt like they didn't have a voice. So maybe they felt marginalized.
Yeah. Well, you know.
I mean, I'm not.
Absolutely, they feel marginalized.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely, yeah.
So what was the unicorn about this guy? Like, what makes him such a unicorn, anyways?
I wouldn't say that he's a unicorn and there's only one of him. I think a lot of people feel the way that he does, and I think of the unicorn more as this mythical person that is rare, right? Or this mystical being that is rare, right? And so when I say someone is a unicorn, it means that they're few and far between. They're 1 in a million. Just because you're not going to have this person that represents all these things that can do them well, or Renaissance person, or a person that has good work ethic, or any number of things that you don't see that a lot of people in society.
Do you think he's a goat at all?
I don't see him as that, because he's the antithesis of everything that I believe a goat should be. So I would say that he's definitely, when all is said and done, I think that during this time he was an important figure for a lot of people, and he represented a movement. And so I see him as a metaphor for a lot of disenfranchised people.
Well, that movement became January 6th, right?
Yeah.
I mean, first time in our history that the Capitol's been on stage. I mean, that was crazy.
Which was horrific.
Horrific.
Yeah.
Horrific.
Is it any different than the Tea Party? Remember, I mean, well, like what happened in 1776. Like,
that Tea Party.
If you have a bunch of people who don't feel like their government's doing anything for them, do they not have a right to take their government down?
Well, that's the problem with America, United States.
I'm just curious.
No,
I'm
no,
just, like,
because
putting it out there.
we were founded on war, right? And we have war embedded into the Constitution. This right to bear arms, this right to fight against our own
Violence.
government, right?
Yeah.
That is implicit. That is right into our.
Wasn't that
rights.
taxation without representation?
Yes,
That's
exactly,
why
all
that was. It's interesting how we're kind of repeating a little
Yeah,
bit of that, aren't
yeah.
We're repeating everything.
But the thing is
It's
that
a cycle. It's all being repeated.
it never really happened in this modern history, right? The way, and
And-
like you see this happen in other countries,
And
right?
I
When the
just-
people revolt and take over.
And I
But
think-
this is a very small segment of the people, but they have very loud voices, right? They're all the Republicans who also voted recently. Those like, Congress tried to protect gay marriage. Like I think 150, 60 Republicans vote against that, and these are all the ones we hear about on the news, right?
Right.
It's
It
scary.
seems to me
We're
like
playing to
there's an ideology, and it's
Yeah.
like, where are we going to find that place where we can maybe come to terms with the differences? How are we going to do that? Come to terms with differences.
I
Like
mean,
your father, for God's sakes. Do you love your father?
Of course. But I'm not gonna.
I mean,
unfortunately,
would
I'm
you
not
put your politics over your family like that? Or would you?
That's what happened during the Civil War, right? Families were also fighting families. But of course, my father is. I'm grateful. My father took me and my siblings to, as refugees from Vietnam after the war. I mean, that's like amazing, right? My life could be so different right now, right? I could be just in Vietnam.
So he contributed something. It's just his ideology's different.
Yeah, and then his ideology changes throughout the years, like anybody's ideology, right? We could be more conservative or more liberal in different points of our life.
Have you guys felt like you've become conservative as you've aged at all? Or do you think there's anything about being conservative that's
I think that's complicated.
helping
Again,
you?
It's very nuanced. One of the things I was thinking about when you were bringing up history and the way that a lot of it is cyclical in terms of how it is that we learn about history, and yet a lot of things get repeated. And so we should know better. We should learn things. But part of this, and I think what we're experiencing right now, is that we weren't prepared for it, and we didn't have the tools to fight it and to articulate ourselves.
Do you feel like
in the news, it's amazing to see those voters who voted for Obama and then they voted for Trump, right? It's just back and forth for them. It's just like this and that. It's like amazing.
So you're vacillating back and forth, and you don't have necessarily the tools, or you're being spun around so quickly that you don't understand what's happening, and someone's telling you, well, you have to be one thing. And
those
it's not
who
complex.
are really into politics is a very small minority of Americans, right? The majority don't have time, to read up on these things, to read white fragility, right? It's like the working class family, right?
Right,
So
and we live in a
for
very
them,
mediated
it's
reality.
not, Trump looks like a great guy, I'm gonna vote for him. He's gonna save America.
Also, I believe that historically when people vote, especially people who aren't really heavily into politics, they'll just vote for the person that they see over and over and over. And so it is very much popularity contest.
And the bottom line, people vote with their wallet. So they'll vote based on
it's the economy,
it's
right?
economy, right? It's the economy stupid kind of thing. And what's gonna happen in the next few years, we don't know, right? The economy is not doing well.
Well, the working class seems to be very the disenfranchised, I think.
so
And I came out of the working class, so for me, I was kind of like felt somewhat compassionate in forgiving, because I'm unconventional. I'm an artist, and I have a different way of seeing the world. That when I go back to Kansas, I have to get along with my family. And I have to, there's a part of me that is trying to deflect the conflict in a way. Because I really don't want to see a civil war, and I'd rather just appreciate what I have and not try to, and let the ideology work itself through people, because there was a movement called Walk Away, and it was started by a gay hairdresser out of I think Beverly Hills. I forget his name, but and he was they was going on like 2 years before the election, and there were people, gay, trans, putting up videos about why they were leaving the left. And I think if we consider ourselves left, we need to pay attention to what it is that, you know, these people, why they're feeling marginalized from the left, and can we improve that if we're taking a side? How can we reach those people without creating a civil war?
But I think that, therein lies the rub, is having to take sides. And I think that our society positions it as this scale, right? And one is always overtaking the other, and it's never balanced.
Do you think it would be helpful if we had a third party?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, there's always hope
Yeah.
for a third party, but this country, the United States, I should say.
I mean,